Welcome to Northwest Air Guns. I'm John, and today our specimen for examination is the Umarex Zelos. Now I call it the Zelos. I see on some of the reviews I've looked at, they call it the Zelos. And I don't know if that's a Arkansas thing or not, but I'm going to call it Zelos. Now what happened is I went to the SHOT Show in January of this year, and I got to talking with the folks at Umarex, and they said they'd send me a couple guns to review, and they did. The Zelos is one, and I did a review on the Complete here just recently. If you haven't seen that and you're interested in a budget rifle that you shoot right out of the box, that might be a good candidate for you. Now let's take a look here at what you get. Of course, you get the rifle, and we'll take a closer look at that in a minute here. So you get 2 magazines. And each one of these holds 20 rounds in 22. I think the 25 caliber holds 18. I kind of like these high capacity magazines, I guess you call them. And it makes me want to set the gun up to get 40 shots and then shoot out 2 of these. Then you know you have to fill up the gun with air again. So you get those. You get a little hex wrench, and that's for the degas button here. And then you get a bunch of paperwork and owner's manual, stuff like that. So that's what you get with the gun. Now let's take a little bit of a closer look here. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the features here. One thing you'll notice, it has, starting at the front end, it's got a gauge here. And this gauge is the one that tells you how much air, pressure, you have in this air tube here, and you can fill this up to 3,625 psi, and I don't know what that is in terms of bar, but the gauge is in psi and the max fill is noted in psi, so we should be good there. And then in the front, they put a cap on it, and it's got a typical Foster fill. And they put a cap, which is supposed to keep out the dust, and I don't understand why they would put a hole in the cap, because the hole, it opens up into the hole where the air goes in. So it seems like that's not really going to help keep dust out of your tube, because it can still get dust into the fill port there. So if you know why they would do that, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to put a piece of tape or something over this to close it up so air doesn't get in. And this is, let's see if I can get this here. This is what I'm talking about. Why would you put a cap on there and then have a hole in the end of your cap? But there may be a reason. Then on the rest of the front end, you've got a couple of things. This comes off, and this is a 1/2-20 thread. So there's a lot of different aftermarket accessories, suppressors or moderators that you can buy, and you can get them usually in 1/2-20, and you could thread them on here. So that's a nice touch. I'm glad they thought of that. And then, but this comes out too, and there's room in here. There's about 4 inches in here before you hit the barrel. And so you could, if you wanted to, if it's not quiet enough, you could get some baffles to put in here. And I see they sell some on eBay, and we may try that if we need to quiet it down a little bit, or just to see if it works. This thread, by the way, is kind of an odd one. I think it's well, it's just I find no record of it. I did take a look and try and figure it out, and as best I can figure, it's 24 millimeter by 1.0 millimeter, and I can't find any documentation of that thread anywhere. So that may be a one of those that just made sense for this application, and so they did it. And while we're at it, I guess we can go ahead and pull the shroud off. And there's your barrel. So moving on down the toward the rear of the Zelos, you've got the air tube here, and it has this Picatinny rail underneath, so you can mount a bunch of accessories there, a bipod or different things. This Picatinny rail, by the way, is you can loosen it up and move it forward or back to wherever you want it on the tube. Now this here, we'll look at this again in a while, but that's where you adjust the regulator right here, and it's already set, I think they said at 2000 psi. So you got 3625 in the air tube maximum, and then the regulator drops that down to 2000 psi. It's a side cocker, and one nice thing about it is you can decock it without firing. And you don't want to do that with the magazine in there because that's going to double load, but it's nice that they thought about making it so that it would do that. The other side, you see there's a burst disc here, so if for some reason you get carried away and put 5,000–6,000 psi in this tube, this will burst so that it doesn't damage other parts of the gun. Let's see, your regulator gauge is here. So you have the one in the front, tells you what the tube pressure is. This one tells you what you have your regulator set at, so that's kind of a nice feature. And this little hole here says degas, and when you want to take the tube off, the air tube for some reason, or if you want to adjust the regulator, you have to degas it here until you get to a certain pressure, and then you can remove the bottle and change the regulator settings. And they give you a Allen wrench to do that right here, right where it says degas. Well, to load the magazine is pretty straightforward. If you look here, you can see the bolt coming through. Just cock the gun. Take your magazine. Let's see, it goes in like this. There's a couple of magnets on the top there that hold it into place. Like so. I mentioned that the Zelos is adjustable in terms of the hammer spring tension, pre-tension, and the way you do that is you got to pull off the buttstock here. So you use what is this, a 2.5 millimeter hex wrench. This part of the buttstock comes off, and that exposes a whole bunch of screws here. You can see there's, let's see if we can get this in the frame. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And on the other side, oh, what do you know? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And all of those got to come out. And then you can remove the buttstock here. And that will expose the hammer spring adjustment. So that's why we'll go ahead and pull them off. What the heck? And these, I believe, yeah, these are 2 millimeter. Is that right? Yeah, 2 millimeter Allen wrench. Yeah, just go. You can see this whole back end comes off. This, by the way, this buttstock, I guess it's adjustable, but not too much. This screw goes into a nut that slides in a channel in there. But here we are, and here is the screw. This one is what you adjust the hammer spring tension on it. So I mentioned the trigger's adjustable, and you actually, the trigger's up here and you can adjust the shoe up or down. You can move it side to side however you want. And there's a linkage here between the trigger and the sear, which is actually in the back here. Let me turn this over so we can get a better look at it. So what we've got here are two adjustments to the trigger. The first is this little nut right here, and that nut can be screwed in or out depending on if you want to increase the trigger travel or decrease it, make it a shorter pull. The other adjustment is for sear engagement, and that's back here. That must be a 1 millimeter or 1.5 millimeter. 1 millimeter would be pretty small. 1.5 millimeter Allen wrench or hex wrench, so that you can get either more or less sear engagement. It's this little screw right here. I wanted to see what kind of velocity and power this gun would do right out of the box. So I slapped on the Nate Crony, grabbed some Beeman Kodiak pellets, and started shooting. I used Beeman Kodiak 21.1 grain pellets, so shooting through 2 magazines for a total of 40 shots, I got a high of 931 feet per second and a low of 858, for an average of 917 feet per second, and a whopping 39 foot-pounds of energy. This was way above the advertised power of 26 foot-pounds. On the other hand, the 73 feet per second spread was beyond what I expected. Looking at the raw velocity numbers, the tank pressure drops below the regulated pressure at about shot number 33. And while we may still get a few more usable shots, they'll be lower power and the spread will increase. But if I had stopped at 33 shots, the spread would have been only 11 feet per second with an average of 921 feet per second, and that with an average of 40 foot-pounds of energy. Okay, what can we make from this shot string? Well, first is that the Zelos can be a doggone powerhouse. Getting an average of 39 foot-pounds over 40 shots is pretty remarkable, as is getting 33 shots at 40 foot-pounds, but with only an 11 foot per second spread. So if you want power, you can have it, or if you want more shots, you can have that. It just depends on how you set the gun up to perform. At this power level, the Zelos makes a pretty loud bark, so I took it out to our Northwest Airguns headquarters and did some decibel testing. Out of the box, at this power level, we got a decibel reading of 106.6. Now this is less than my staple gun at 108.3 decibels, but still loud enough that it's marginal for a suburban backyard setting. And the sound seems louder because it projects out from the barrel. In other words, it isn't dissipated, and so is louder downrange than it is from behind. I mentioned that there is room in the shroud for some extra baffles. So I went on eBay and picked up a set of 3D printed baffles and then installed them into the shroud. This reduced the noise level to 104 decibels, which is quieter but still a pretty loud bark. So then I pulled out the baffles and screwed on a 3D printed buck rail moderator. Remember, the Zelos is fitted with a 1/2 20 thread, so any variety of aftermarket sound suppressors can be screwed into place. This brought the noise level down to 99 decibels, which is a big difference from the stock gun or even with the eBay baffles. This is getting into backyard friendly territory, and if I tune it for less power, the rifle should get even quieter. Well, even the most cool looking, lightweight, powerful air rifle is worthless if a person can't hit anything with it. So I set up a target at 25 yards to see if this Zelos lived up to its reputation for accuracy. Using those same Beeman Kodiak pellets, I shot a 5-pellet group, and then I stopped. I had planned to test the accuracy by shooting several different kind of pellets, but really, why bother? The group was 1/4 inch center to center, and I can't shoot any better than that. I could cover it with a quarter, or a nickel, or even a penny. Even a dime covers the pellet holes, although a little bit of the splatter still shows. And I'd read that the Zelos was accurate, but I didn't expect this right out of the box with unsorted pellets. All right, let's wrap this up. We're talking about the Zelos here from Umarex. First question, is it accurate? Well, duh. You know, I used the Beeman Kodiak or H&N Barracuda pellets with this thing, mainly because I'd bought about 10 tins way back when, 10 years ago, to use in another gun, and then I sold that gun, but I still have the pellets. So really, I was just trying to get rid of the darn things. And they shoot dime groups. So anyway, yes, it is accurate. When you want power, you can adjust this, the regulator and the hammer spring, and you can get all the power you'll ever need from an air gun. If you want less power, you can adjust those and get less power and more shots. So adjustability, power, they all kind of go together with this gun, and it gives you a lot of flexibility in setting it up however you want to set it up. Now, I wouldn't call this a lightweight gun, especially when you put a honking scope on it like this Hawk, but it's lighter than most of the other guns I have. It's lighter than a Marauder. So yeah, it's reasonably light, easy to handle. The length of this thing is 36 inches before you put a moderator on it. And you don't have to have a moderator if you don't mind it shooting a little bit loud. Put the moderator on and we go to 42, so it added 6 inches. I mentioned it has a regulator that you can adjust here, and the nice thing is it's got a gauge so you can see where your regulator is set to. And then it also has the gauge in the fill tube so you can see how much pressure you got. So that's kind of well thought out. I like the ability to check your fill pressure and also the regulator pressure. Noise we talked about a little bit. This quiets it down quite a bit. If you don't mind a little bit louder gun bordering on backyard unfriendly, then you wouldn't have to get the moderator and you can just shoot it with the shroud that comes with it. But for me, kind of in a suburban setting, part of the time anyway, I needed that little bit of extra quieting power on it. All right, well, everything isn't perfect with this gun. Let's see, I found the magazine to be kind of fiddly fitting it in. It's not a big deal, it just takes some getting used to. But the nice thing is it gets 20 shots, so I like that part about it. I mentioned I didn't like the hole here in the end of the fill cap, and I put a piece of tape over it just to keep the dust from getting into it. You know, if I only had a hand pump, I don't think I would appreciate this gun very much, because you fill it to 36-25, and that's a lot. You know, they get harder too as you fill it up. So I think if a person was going to get one of these, they really ought to look into a compressor to go with it, an electric compressor. And I guess the last thing I had trouble with was the cheek weld between the butt plate here and the cheek, and getting my eye down. I had to kind of let's see, well, I had to kind of lean my head over, and I had a problem with that. It's a bullpup kind of a thing that has always kind of held me back from loving one of these. I had a guy over here the other day, and he was thinking about buying a Zelos, and so I let him shoot mine. He didn't have any trouble with it. And what I found is if I used high mounts for the scope and then adjust this butt pad down a little bit, then that raises everything up, and the cheek to butt weld there isn't as bad as I had thought it out to be. Maybe it's just me, but I had a problem with that with another bullpup, and this one, I think with the high mounts and the adjustment on the butt plate, is going to be fine. So these things run about $600. If you can find them on sale, maybe it's down to $500. I don't see many used for sale, which tells me something. People are generally happy with them, I guess. All right, well, that's about it. I really like the Zelos, or Zelos, depending on how you want to say it. And I think it might be my new go-to hunting gun or pest control gun. just because of the accuracy, and you get a lot of shots. So one thing I want to figure out is how to put a sling on this thing, because I don't want to just, you know, carry it by hand when I'm out in the field. So I got to figure that out, how to get one in down here, maybe drill into the butt plate here, and then something up here. I'm a little reluctant to put too much of a stress onto the air tube, you know, and use it as a structural element. But, you know, people put bipods on here and stuff, so maybe it's okay. All right, I want to thank Umarex for sending this to me, and thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.